Welcome to the Still Life podcast, a series of 21 topics, with each episode exploring the practical nature of the spiritual experience. With time-tested insights from psychotherapy, evolutionary biology, and meditation from ex-animator and stillness coach, Jim.
Because I view Jim George as a trainer for the soul. There's no better animation artist, drawer than Jim.
He is a friend, he is a mentor, incredible advisor. There's no one who's more important to me in my life.
The most interesting, most intelligent person I've ever met.
He truly is somebody who wants nothing from you and everything for you.
My name is Henry, and I'm a former client of Jim's, and the work we've done together over the past 8 years has changed my life. We're now on a mission to share these insights with you and to draw some pretty interesting conclusions on how to live a still life. Well, hello everybody, and welcome to the Still Life podcast. My name is Henry, I'm your co-host, and today is episode 3 of 21 in our mini-series. We'll be talking about moderation. So moderation is something that I've personally struggled with in my time, whether that be with eating, drinking alcohol, exercise. I tend to take things to an extreme. And so I wanted to get Jim's perspective on everything because I thought that he would have some really good insights, and I was right. We start out the conversation by talking about moderation, and then Jim makes a key distinction between moderation and mediocrity. Following that, we talk about what Jim moderates in his life. Then we spend quite a bit of time in Henry Therapy Land talking about some of my less glamorous habits and how I might be able to do a better job of moderating them. Well, it gets pretty emotional, and I hope that you get as much out of this as I did. So sit back and enjoy. So we have an important topic today.
Okay, I'm ready. Here we go.
And it was one that I really misunderstood until I started to explore it with you. And I think that it's thrown around a lot, but not necessarily defined as precisely or presented all that clearly. And that would be moderation.
Wow. That's a great topic. You're right. It's hardly understood at all.
So I think that's actually quite a good place to start. How do you define it? And how do you understand moderation within yourself?
Well, just always remember, this is just my take on things. This isn't a hard and fast definition. I like to think of moderation as keeping things within reasonable limits or bounds, avoiding excess, avoiding extremes. That's very different from mediocrity. And in our high achievement culture, those two terms are frequently interchanged. They're thought of as almost the same thing. That moderation and mediocrity mean the same thing. I'd like to suggest that if you just look at the words themselves and their derivations, their etymology, as they call it, there's a profound clue there. Moderation, from moderatus, which is the past participle of moderare, which is the Latin for control. Just keep things in control. Mediocrity, from the Latin, originally from the Greek, akris is a peak or a mountain, and medi means either in the middle or halfway. So mediocrity literally means halfway up the peak, doing something halfway. There is no medi in moderation. Moderation is a highly relative term. So we have to be careful. I hope I didn't wander off too much.
No, not
into
at
the
all.
mud.
But you've provoked some interesting stuff. So when people say moderation in our society, people say that you have to moderate certain things. And to me, when we use that term, it feels like a balance of certain things. You know, work and play, short-term pleasure, long-term gratification, impulsivity versus like discipline. That's sort of one categorization, and that's kind of fuzzy, I guess.
Sure.
And then there's this other aspect where it's like there's an even distribution of certain activities so that you feel your best, you know, whether it be exercising, socializing, recovery, et cetera, et cetera. How do you feel about mediocrity as it comes to those certain activities that most people say that you need to moderate?
Well, let's consider that moderation gives us balance. And I'd like to reach a little with a clarification of what balance is by going way up to the most macro position we can effectively reach in a conversation. I'd like to suggest that the universe itself is what I call holotropic. Holo meaning H-O-L-O, meaning whole, and tropic meaning inclining toward or turning toward. I'd like to suggest that the universe itself is constantly trying to turn toward and return to wholeness, completeness, where nothing is left out. So that intrinsically, as it starts moving down into the micro, implies a kind of balance. Because anytime you get too far to one side, and remember, we're not talking about wholeness now, we're talking about existing within wholeness. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So you get too far over to one side, the universe itself is going to incline you to get back toward the other side in order to balance and return to this sense of wholeness, balance. And I'd like to suggest that's going on everywhere. That's all ecology is a balance. And whenever we as human beings try to interfere with that balance because we know better, it always ends up in disaster. It may not be for decades or even centuries, but eventually we begin to see the wisdom of this universal sense of balance. So given that, as we start dropping down, we think, okay, too much of anything isn't a good thing. Okay, so how do we determine what's too much of a good thing? Because a good thing feels good. So we tend to start doing it more and more and more until we reach an extreme. An extreme. We then slip into what's called excess. Excess is just some quality or quantity beyond which is necessary or useful. That's all we mean by excess. You realize what a highly relative term that is. What are you trying to do? What's your goal and why? That's far more important than just a vague catch-all term like moderation if it's not used in conjunction with rubber meets the road, real life living. So as we start talking about what would mediocrity be, it's, okay, I'm going to go play a little, but not very much, just kind of halfway. And I'm going to go work a little bit, but not very much. And then I'm going to go distract myself from the fact that I haven't accomplished much of anything. That's kind of what a lot of people are doing. They're putting as little effort in as they can, and that produces what we call mediocre results. But even mediocrity, relative term. For a person who's pursuing excellence, something that's good enough isn't good enough. So I'd suggest that moderation for both of those people is a very different thing. That's not a very popular belief, by the way. It means you're responsible for what moderation means because you've carefully thought it through and you've worked it out and you've engendered some wisdom along the way to inform your decision. That make sense?
It does make sense.
Okay.
And it's very exciting for me because there's a direction that I love taking this, and I know that you despise me taking it in this direction. So there's a part of me that just starts to smile.
I love you. I love how your mind works. I love how you think and then are willing to explore. Because all we're doing today is exploring. This isn't somebody pontificating. You just asked what my thoughts are. I'm just a guy.
Well, using the misunderstood definition of moderation, I would say that you're not a very moderate person because you tend to take things to a place of excess, to extreme, in order to attain excellence. But the way that I think about it is that you're very much in control of those activities and you're very much moving away from mediocrity. And the way that I sort of understand it, but please forgive me if I'm off base and also forgive me for making this about you, because that's the part that I know that you really don't like me doing.
I don't know.
But it seems as if you've spent so much time on this earth that you've picked the few activities that you know to be intrinsically energizing to you and decided to pursue those to excess, to excellence, and to a standard that you feel as if is really doing justice to the feeling that the activity gives you as you do it. And I think that with that, it seems that you're not a very moderate person because it's like, well, Jim, don't you have time for vacation? Isn't there any balance with leisure?
Not for 45 years now.
Yeah. And so I was wondering if you could just expand on that a bit more and discuss how you picked those activities, what it has meant for you to have taken them to an extreme, and then really doing that exploration, understanding what is it that I want to be moderate of and what is it that I want to potentially ignore. Because I think that there are some activities that you would never really want to moderate. Like, I don't really think that you care so much about your heroin consumption. That's really not something that you're planning on moderating anytime soon.
I have no experience with it.
Well, not yet.
I can't
not
moderate
yet. Don't be
it.
close-minded, Jim.
So the only thing, first of all, long and complex question.
I apologize.
Don't. I love it. But before I try to sort of break it down, there's only one piece that I want to push back on, and that's your use of the term excess. Excess is any quantity or amount beyond what's necessary, what's useful. I'd like to contend that I have not reached excess in almost anything I've been doing for quite a while because I'm very carefully monitoring what it is that I'm trying to do in the first place. Then I have to determine what the extremes are, what the outer bounds are, and then I have to stay within those outer bounds. But I have to determine what those boundaries are. Are they in fact boundaries? Or are they just perceived boundaries? So I may not appear to be moderate to people who don't have the same goals that I have. They're not pursuing the same things that I'm pursuing. That makes perfect sense. I can understand how it appears that I'm not moderate, but like I said, in my definition, moderation, like so many terms, highly relative. It's relative to the person, relative to what it is they're trying to do, and relative to why they're trying to do it. So, one of the things that I would ask is, why do people need vacations? It's assumed that people need vacations. What is a vacation?
It's, I would say, time away from a usual day-to-day type activity, which has a connotation to work. So time away from whatever work that you're doing.
How much time?
I think that's really relative to the type of work that you're doing. For example, a billionaire can afford to take a lot of time for leisure rather than somebody who's working and looking to put food on the table for a few children. They probably don't have as much time to spare in terms of taking time away from something that's generating income.
Good. I'd like to suggest that I take vacations all the time. They just don't have to be very long. I'm taking a vacation with every breath that I'm taking from what I'm doing, so that I come back to the new present moment, refreshed and ready. I'm practicing that because that's a skill and I need to get better and better at it. So I'm not limiting my practice to an hour in the morning or an hour in the evening. I'm practicing it as often as I can. That means more and more I'm doing that every waking second. Now, for most people, doing anything every waking second is insane. That's okay. They don't want what I want. I don't want to have to vacate what I'm doing because I'm doing something out of balance. I'm doing something that isn't ultimately rewarding for me. I need to escape it. That is, I need to take 2 weeks or 3 weeks off. I'm doing that all day long because what I need to do requires a different kind of presence. I'm not going to work. I'm not sitting. I'm not working. I'm engaging with people, and I have to be ultra present with those people. That means I do the best I can to be present. I relax it. I do the best I can to be present. I relax it. And that oscillation is perceived as, this guy's right here. This guy is attending 100% because he is. And that level of energy is a very different experience than most people have when they interact with another human being. Right now, you're the only thing in my world, the only thing in my world. Nothing else exists. I consider that a perfectly moderate way to operate, given what it is I want to do. Be present. For somebody else, well, that's crazy. It just depends on what you want.
Do you mind if I give you my sort of interpretation of what you just said?
Would.
And please, again, as always, course correct when necessary, because it is not going to be as accurate as I'd like to think it to be. So what I was hearing from that is that you don't necessarily want to vacate your occupation. You don't want to take time away from anything because through my observation, like, why would you take a day off of purpose? Why would
It's not just an occupation. I'm not occupying myself because I'm bored. I'm doing what I'm here to do. That's the greatest gift anybody can be given, to know what that is.
Oh, it's a gift and a responsibility.
Well, the last thing I want is to vacate that. I want to continue to get better and better at it.
So I just wanted to jump in here really quickly and color the point that Jim's making with my own experience and sort of witnessing of him. So if we go back to the beginning of the podcast, he goes to the Latin definition of moderation to control something, right? And he's not a man that has anything to do with mediocrity. He really doesn't. And so if you're taking things to high quality, that means that you take fewer things to a higher quality. And so he really controls a very few activities that give him a large sense of intrinsic meaning. And he's talking about one which is just being present with people all day. Now, he's just spent so long creating this feedback loop of his activity against how he feels intrinsically and then optimized for meaning, right, over time. So much so that now he doesn't want to go on vacation. Why would he take a step away from that formula when he has everything that he needs every day? What he's not saying is don't go on holiday, because most people aren't going to put the effort in to find that sort of job to intrinsic sense of meaning fit, right? And so it might actually be good to take a vacation if your job is draining. But what he's getting at is that he is so energized by the work that he does and the people that he does it with that he doesn't want to take a step away from it. And I think that's just bloody beautiful. All right, let's get back into it, shall we?
I've said this in many different ways. I'm not here to sell stillness. I'm here to share it if someone wants it. If they don't want it, I thoroughly encourage them to pursue what they do want. That's why they're here. That's why every one of us has a unique path. So there's no, this is what everybody should be doing. It's been very helpful for me, and it's been very helpful dealing with the kinds of things that our culture struggles with, because they tend not to look inward, they tend to look outward. But if they want to continue looking outward and do not want to look inward, great. I don't want to take this to an extreme and turn into some born-again dude on a street corner. No.
Well, do you think it's worth taking some activities to an extreme just to find the bound?
Yes.
Especially if those activities are ones that you deem internally energizing, right? If we take the heroin example, I don't think it's a good idea to explore that extreme.
Sure.
But if we use more so there are a few of them that I've really learned through observation of you, one of them being diet and nutrition, right? You know, taking that to an extreme is actually not going to, unless it stresses you out more than it's going to help your health in the long run. That's one that doesn't necessarily feel as if it comes to you can't really get to an unhealthy place with it. Maybe I'm incorrect there. I think I'm stepping on some thin ice, so I'm excited for you to again course correct where necessary. But then again, there's also exercise and stillness. Those are three that I've observed within you that you, when compared to the general population, may be considered an extremist of. Because, I mean, when was the last time you missed a workout?
Can't remember.
There we go. When was the last time you didn't eat incredibly well?
Can't remember.
Yeah, there we go. There's no sort of balance as such. Those don't seem to be activities that need to necessarily be like counterbalanced with a vice or with time off or relaxation. I was wondering if you could dig into those, because I think that it would be just really informative for me to understand how you think about it, and also potentially for the listeners as well.
Sure. Well, again, you touch on these incredibly important things, and you open the door for exploration. Remember, that's what we're doing. We're just exploring. I'm not some be-all, end-all guy. This is just my view. I'd like to suggest, though, that I am very moderate with both my diet nutrition and my exercise, given what it is that I want. So let's head back to the drawing board, see if we can't get a clearer picture. Remember, we're talking about how doing certain things can seem extreme to some people, but not seem extreme to others. In fact, be quite moderate to others. So let's start with an example, an analogy of even finding the extremes. So imagine a blind man walking. Now he's walking with a white cane. What's he doing with that white cane? Well, he's actually sweeping, tapping for where not to walk. He's tapping for where not to walk, so he knows where to walk. Consider this where not to walk, the extremes. All right? So, between these extremes is the path of moderation. Okay? So, let's consider some examples of behaviors that might be thought of as extreme to most people. All right? So imagine watching 2 movies per night, 7 days a week. All right? That would be considered pretty extreme for most people. And let's consider running 10 miles per day, every day, 7 days a week. That would be considered pretty extreme for most people. But I'd like to suggest that if you're a movie critic, well, then watching 2 movies per night may not be enough for you, even though running 10 miles per day may still be extreme. But I'd like to suggest that if you are an Olympic marathon runner, well, then running 10 miles per day may not be enough, even though watching 2 movies per night may still be extreme. And I'd like to suggest that if you're a brain surgeon, well, you probably don't have much time for anything else anyway. So remember, extreme behavior is relative to the individual. What it is you actually want to do. That's why it's important to know who you are and what it is you're actually doing. That's where a little stillness comes in. I don't look at every package to determine what the breakdown of the specific carbs are in this salt that I'm using. I mean, I don't do that. I'm careful. I don't eat anything that I don't think is either good fuel or good building material for my body. But I don't consider myself an extremist when I watch people who have just taken it to the point where that's an all-consuming world. It's very similar to this thing. I did some survival work just because I used to live in the mountains. I needed to know how to survive. It's very common for people not to drink brackish water and die of thirst. Because, well, I'm not going to drink that water. It may make me sick. Good. So my option is I'll die. And it sounds funny, but that's what's going on in their mind. So you've got this world of, oh, well, I won't eat anything but grass-fed, grass-finished, ever. Well, if you're someplace on vacation, and for a variety of reasons, one of which may be you are going to really offend someone who has taken all day to prepare you a beautiful meal, but they don't even know what grass-fed means. And, oh, I'm not going to eat that. Well, that's where we get into values. That's why we always begin with values in our program, what we're presenting. Because the question is, what's important and how important is it? So being healthy is very important to me, but I don't train like I used to train. I used to train 3.5 hours a day, 6 days a week. I was on my way to killing myself, but I had to find that upper limit and then learn ways to train more efficiently, more effectively, and still get what it is that I wanted. I'm not going halfway up the mountain. I'm getting to the top of the mountain by a better route. So, stillness. I am not sitting in the lotus position all day long, abandoning my life so that I can be in a state of stillness all the time. By not being extreme, by not going to an excess, I'm discovering ways to keep coming back to stillness, which I've discovered over decades of really working this, is the trick. The trick isn't to be in a perpetual state of stillness. That's a superhuman state. The trick is to get still, be in this present moment, and then as you drift into experiencing that moment goes from now to back then, you come back. You go, you come back. Go, you come back. Oh, you come back. That's the rep that we want to develop when we're getting still. It isn't a single state. It's an oscillation between utterly absorbed in what's happening and instantly coming back to what they call child mind or beginner's mind. I'm now wide open for the next present moment. Present moment's no longer clouded by what's happened before. I'm ready. I'm actually here for what's happening. For a lot of people, that's crazy. For me, that is absolutely moderate pursuit of the honest-to-God practice of stillness. But my value system has placed the value of understanding and pursuing and ultimately mastering stillness above a lot of other things, including eating Pop-Tarts. Because there's a lot of pleasure in eating Pop-Tarts. I don't want to pick on Pop-Tarts. But it is not even remotely worth what eating Pop-Tarts is going to do to me, as opposed to what it's going to do in a negative way to me. And part of that is understanding the power of repetitive actions. First time you do something, it makes the next time easier. We're going to explore this in the future. It's a very powerful mechanism, and it's intrinsic to our neurology. So every time I practice not eating healthy food, I get better at it. If I keep practicing eating unhealthy food, I'm going to master it. I'll be a 400-pound potato. But I don't want to be a 400-pound potato. Now, I'm saying that there's nothing wrong with being a 400-pound potato if, in fact, what you value is the pleasure of eating the kinds of foods that got you to that physical state. You see, I'm not judging or condemning any of it. I just want to make sure that we're all clear. This is what I'm doing, and this is why I'm doing it. Because hedonism is a great lifestyle if that is in fact what you want. But all of these things have a cost. See, the price I pay gladly, willingly, is I don't get to do all the stuff that everybody else seems to think is essential to living. For me, that stuff just gets in the way of what it is that I want. Now, just statistically speaking, that makes me an extremist. I don't see it that way, but statistically, it's true.
That's pretty beautiful, because the way that I interpreted that is that you define the mountains that you want to summit internally.
And why?
And why?
You got to dig into the why. Because if all we're doing is filling up some weird void or a deep, unconscious feeling of inadequacy, so I have to just climb mountains over and over again, and when I hit the peak, I got to climb another one because there's something inside of me that doesn't feel enough, that's a completely different motivation than I love mountain climbing. Mountain climbing is just great.
And what I would take from this is that your motivation isn't necessarily away from a feeling of inadequacy, but if you are, as you were talking, you mentioned a hierarchy, and it seems that exercise and health are very much serving a larger piece in that hierarchy.
Yes. Can't do my job if I can't show up.
Yeah, exactly.
No, I mean it. I mean it.
And show up to your best.
Yeah.
Show up as your best as well, because if you practice eating well and exercising and the discipline of quieting your mind over and over again, that gives you the ability to be extremely present with the person that you are with. And if you're extremely present with the person you are with, you are sharing the state of stillness, whether they know it or not.
Exactly.
And that...
Will you do me a favor? Say that again, just so you and everyone else can hear it. That's an important statement that you just glossed over. That's wisdom.
You are sharing the state of stillness, whether you know it, whether they know it or not.
Yes.
And as you are doing that, you are increasing the likelihood of them being lit up by whatever sort of epiphanies that they have within themselves through the gift and the state of stillness.
Yes.
So you're increasing your own likelihood of feeling and sharing that as well.
Yes.
And so that's...
I'm a selfish rat when it comes right down to it.
I think we were talking about this in identity, or it might have been meaning with altruism, where you get to the point where your sense of self is so expanded that you're genuinely helping yourself.
Yes.
And so I think that when it comes to you moderating, you're controlling a few activities to then serve the thing that is the most meaningful to you, the thing that you feel as if you've been put here to do, which is to share this gift of stillness.
Yeah.
And so why would you have anything on the platter that doesn't necessarily serve that?
There you go.
And so being very sort of, I would say clinical in terms of like, okay, this works, this doesn't, in this measure, in this measure, in this measure, and this is serving. That has sort of helped you to increase your feeling of meaning, increase your feeling of service to this world. And I bet that helps you to sleep well at night, I hope.
It does. And the point of this thing is that's always a work in progress. I don't want to give the impression that I'm sitting here in endless, limitless bliss 24/7. I'm still working on this thing. But the exploration itself is becoming more and more rewarding, especially the exploration of everything I've tried to avoid because it's unpleasant or painful. The biggest piece, the toughest piece, the one that should be kept until you're really ready to dive in and do this work, anything that you are trying to avoid has tremendous gifts if you'll just lean into it. And you may not understand it even while it's happening. But on the other side of it, whoa, tremendous reward.
Can you explain that a little bit more, please? Or at least maybe give an example.
In a total cliche, no pain, no gain. When I first started working out, I couldn't believe what it felt like to throw a bar with 225 pounds on it on my back and go up and down in squats. I couldn't believe how hard that was, how painful it was, how scary it was. I thought I was going to break my back. And when I ultimately got up to having 500 pounds on my back, with spotters, by the way, I'm not stupid, I realized that 225 pounds felt like I could do it with one leg when I came back down after doing the work, which is go right into what is painful. What do you not want? What's uncomfortable? But I think I did it in the outer bounds of moderation, because I'm still here. I didn't, in fact, break my back or blow my knees out. That had nothing to do with me at the time, but there was a deeper intrinsic sense of I better not push this farther than that. But I found my limits within 2 years of training, of working out. I found my limits and stayed within them. They're not arbitrary limits. They were limits I discovered. My body type, my genotype, my phenotype, all of that led to this is my limit. Anything in excess of that is not useful. It's not helping. It isn't necessary. Doing something that's going to break your back isn't making you healthier. It's not making you stronger. It's making you weaker. But you have to find those limits. This is what I encourage people to do. Carefully look for your limits.
And what's so interesting is that when you were at that place, when you were at your limit, to the point that you were making with no pain, no gain, that is where growth occurs.
Yep,
because
always.
That is the stretch zone. And I think you're correct in saying, like, don't push it to the point where you snap.
Right.
But staying in that sort of Goldilocks zone where it's the just the right amount of strain and discomfort is actually really helpful in terms of readjusting your thought patterns and understanding of your own limits.
Right.
And I think that that's a really worthy pursuit, especially as we go through life, because those limits change. I don't think in 15 years' time, you're going to want to think about squatting 500 pounds.
I wouldn't even think about squatting 225 anymore. We used to warm up with that. Now, I wouldn't dream of putting that much on my back. But it changes throughout your life. But I'd like to suggest that those limits are helping at a psychological level, almost therapeutically, to make you ask, why am I doing this? It's such a cliche, but so many people, I used to own a gym, and so many of the young guys that I used to train were coming in because they have a fundamental sense of inadequacy. And the cliche, I had to be very careful training guys like this. The cliche is they are trying to compensate by making their body bigger and stronger and more and more armor for this soft little piece in here that doesn't feel like it's enough. Well, part of what we want to do is get in there and get to that place that doesn't feel that it's enough, and not in some kind of armchair psychology, everybody gets an A, everybody gets a participation award. I mean, do the work to make yourself accomplish enough to be worthwhile. I don't mean it just magically happens by thinking good thoughts, but doing the work will become extreme and excessive if you don't go in and figure out, okay, I'm doing this because I'm trying to fill a hole that's never going to be filled in a gym. It can be helped in a gym, but I got to do some deeper work. And that's part of why stillness is so powerful in this world. Again, even in this topic of moderation, stillness will really help you to get to the core of who and what you actually are. I'm suggesting that if you get still enough, that is, do it deep enough and do it frequently enough, you're going to have answers come to you. That's a very Socratic approach. Socrates felt that people really knew deeply a lot, if not everything. You just have to keep asking the right questions. Stillness quiets the noise and distraction so you can determine, why am I doing this? And then when you have the answer, why am I doing this? And that answer still works, you will do it clear into geezerhood. I'll be, you'll hear thumping in my coffin. That'll be me doing forced reps inside the coffin after I'm dead. It's just a habit. I can't stop it.
No, I think that's brilliant, and it really resonates with me personally, because if we go back to just values in general, I thought for a long time that I really valued my personal health.
Yeah.
And when you were talking about, I was a little triggered when you were talking about going into like looking at all of the back of the packaging and all of that stuff, because I've tracked my macronutrients, I've done a keto diet, I've done paleo, I've done it all.
Sure. Why?
Because I valued control and vanity. And that took a long time and a lot of stillness to really reveal itself to me.
That is such a beautiful and honest response that I have to pause and just congratulate you. Because understanding that is going to set you free. What are you trying to control by looking at your macronutrients? What are you trying to control, really?
The way that I look.
Okay? What is out of control about the way you look? Go deep.
Other people's perception. That's something that I can't control, but that's what I was attempting to, I think.
Well, I don't know. Why are you even having to worry about what you eat? What are you trying to control? This could be one of those moments. What happens when you don't control what you eat? And if this is too personal, tell me, we stop.
No. I'm absolutely fine.
What happens when you don't control what you eat?
I feel a sense of, I don't know.
What do you do when you don't control what you eat?
Binge.
Binge. What are you controlling?
The amount that I'm eating.
The completely unregulated, unmoderated id that's trying to fill something by continuing to eat way beyond when that is useful or sufficient enough. That's what you're trying to control. Getting still will allow you to see that. and stop playing at these other levels that sound better or feel better and get to the core of the thing. Control, in that case, is useful. But remember what you're controlling. You're the only one that's going to stand in front of the refrigerator and keep eating chocolate chip cookies. Now, somebody else isn't going to stand over you. But by the same token, if you moderate that behavior, if you control it, it's going to help you, if you continue to get still, get to the hole that's trying to be filled with food.
So I just wanted to jump in here quickly and make something pretty clear, if it wasn't already, that both stillness and gym have really helped me to illuminate some of the darker aspects of myself, some of the more unattractive aspects, and really help me to ask the right questions to grow through them. And I don't necessarily believe myself to be all that graceful, but I do believe that I'm here to help. And if that means just becoming as open and transparent as possible so that people can see how gym works with someone in that state and hopefully get something from it themselves, that to me is doing something good for this world. Anyway, all that being said is that we have a lot of resources that we give away for free, and you can see some of those in our show notes so that you can explore this practice yourself and potentially get some of the benefits and grow through some of the aspects of self that might not be as attractive to you. Anyway, let's get back to the show, shall we?
And this is where I wish a lot of therapists would understand that that hole isn't filled by aphorisms. That hole isn't filled by saying, I'm fabulous, I can do anything, because you can't. That hole is filled by going inside and discovering who and what you really are, what's important, and then shifting your life to that. If that means overcoming some things, great. But that hole will start to get filled, slowly at first, but increasingly as you start feeding it real stuff. Behavioral stuff and nutritional stuff. Until finally, you don't have to worry about what's going to happen. I don't even think about eating anymore, to be honest with you. It's just a habit. I would bore people to death because I eat very same kinds of stuff all day, every day. I don't change that much. I don't think now, if you put anything that's not good for me in front of me, oh God, don't, no, I'll slip. I just don't think so. That wasn't always the case. It's changed because the hole's filled. The hole that needs the pleasure, the hedonistic pleasure of yet another piece of double chocolate cheesecake, I need that like I need a hernia. No, I'm serious. But what is it that I need? I'm feeling empty inside. I'm trying to fill it as best I can. This is where, if you'll just be compassionate with yourself, anybody, just be compassionate. Understand why you're doing this. Don't beat yourself up. Give yourself some real tools to work with. Ooh, things start to improve.
Well, as always, I just want to thank you, because it was through stillness that I realized that I was desperately trying to fill that inadequacy, that hole, that vacuum that I had within myself.
Yeah, unlike the rest of us, by the way. We've all got it, Henry.
And it was through moments of stillness, when I'm stepping on the scale and I'm like, if I really value health, do I care if this number is different?
There you go.
And then it's like, well, actually, I'm putting a lot of importance on the number underneath, between my toes,
Yes.
rather than how I feel on the inside.
Yes.
And that came through stillness, because it's when you can stop that narrative in your mind that you can, insert a couple of uncomfortable questions.
Yes.
And you can look at the thing that you're avoiding, which is, maybe the question could be, what am I avoiding here? Why is this so important to me? Why is this driving so much of my behavior?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that this really came to me at a point where so many aspects of my life were out of control. Well, actually, nothing ever is really truly within your control.
Right.
But it was outside of my perception of control.
Yeah.
And at that point, this was something where it's like I have an instantaneous feedback loop where I know if I'm doing well and I can reward myself, when so much of the other stuff in my life is just unknown, up in the air. Okay, screw it, let's see what happens.
Yeah.
And so I think it's an ongoing revelation, because I still think about what I eat. I still look at menus before I go to restaurants to make sure that there's stuff on there that like will fit into this new rule set that I've defined for myself.
Sure.
But I think what's been really liberating is this slow movement away from that being a punishing activity and one that's coming from sort of a cold place within myself to actually, how do I feel my best? And when I feel my best, what am I then able to do?
Yeah.
And that's still a work in progress. That's still a dynamic.
Sure.
That's something that I'll continue to work on. And hopefully there'll be a day where I feel similarly to you, where it's like I open the fridge and there's nothing that I need to worry about.
Yeah.
But that day for me it's definitely not today, and it probably won't be tomorrow.
But at your age, to have already arrived at the place you've arrived, there's a certain amount of what they call equanimity in this. I'm feeling more balanced in my life. Now, to your point, first of all, I don't have to worry so much about checking menus before I go out to eat, because, I don't go out to eat, hardly ever. But when I do want to know what kind of food they have, because if I'm going to some place, I don't want to disparage any restaurants, so I'll be careful. But if all they're serving is filler food, I will and have, based on the value structure, who has invited me or whatever, I'll eat first before I go. And I'm not all that hungry. Maybe I'll just have a salad. I've never had any kind of pressure from anybody. Oh, don't you want to have some, another He-Man spaghetti plate? No, I really don't need it. No one's given me any pressure. So a lot of the pressure is perceived that, other people are going to want you to do things. But you've come like light years. And remember, a lot of this has to do with how we're raised. What we learn, how we learn to eat. And why.
Yeah.
So just understand, everybody is different. That's why these are never sort of generic terms. Moderation. Moderation is relative to who and what you are and what it is you value. If you don't value knowing what your values are, that's a very telling thing. And it will cost you.
Well, I just want to thank you for your kind words and really flip this right back to you, because it's been through not moderating, or at least trying to find the extreme of what stillness can do for me, which has been directly correlated to inner growth through insight and understanding of self.
From you and that state of stillness. Be very clear about that. I'm not telling you what to do.
Oh, I will be very clear about this.
Yeah.
He has never told me what to do, ever. And that's half the reason that I just want to pick his brain and share this insight with people, because I don't think that there are many people like you that authentically, genuinely just care for other people's well-being, not from a place of any sort of self-service whatsoever. Or when I say self-service, it's a very internal self-service, because you're just getting fired up from other people getting fired up.
Yeah.
And I think it's just so important, because no, you've not told me what to do, but instead you've taught me how to fish.
Yeah.
Whereas like, here are a couple of techniques to quiet your mind, to find true stillness, and then see what happens, then see what arises, and it's going to be absolutely unique to you.
Yes.
It's not going to be anything that I've told you. That is, again, something that I vetted for the longest time. And actually, sometimes it was pretty frustrating, because I was like, why don't you just give me the bloody answer, Jim? I don't want to have to work this out for myself. Talk about conserving energy. It's like, why don't you just tell me, Mr. Genius?
Sure.
Anyway, this is a very long-winded way of saying thank you for those tools, and thank you for your pursuit, and for not moderating certain activities just to show people that you can do that.
Yeah.
Because that's something that's really important for me, is that knowing that somebody like you exists means that somebody like who I want to become can exist as well. And that comes at the cost of really sacrificing what other people think.
Yeah.
I think that that's the biggest piece to this, and being very true to what it is that is surfacing within me, and continuing to stop avoiding the uncomfortable truths that may be surfacing, and to then, as you were mentioning, deal with them with compassion, to hopefully find resolve, or at least understanding, to then practice habits to redirect the trajectory of who and what it is that you want to become.
Sure.
So that was a really waffly thank you. And I think that's probably a good place to, tie the bow before I start, just talking about stuff that has absolutely nothing to do with our topic today. But thank you, Jim. I truly appreciate it. And I love you for all of the gifts, and for all of for everything that you've been sharing with me, and with the thousands of people at this point around the world.
Boy, I love you right back, and you know that, and that's important to me, because knowing that you're loved is one of the biggest gifts you can have. Loving and being loved, it's a circuit. It doesn't go one way. And so thank you. And I want to thank you for being here, for being interested enough in what we're doing to show up as well. I hope this has been helpful.
So as always, thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode. Now, if you're looking to build a stillness practice yourself, we have a lot of free resources, audios that Jim's recorded, etc., and you can see those in our show notes below. Along with that, there are also online courses that you can roll in if you want to learn more from Jim. We also have Obsidian mind maps. You can see a couple of them popping up here on the screen. Now, these are really cool ways to look at the podcast information and really just get an overview of all of the podcast topics and deepen the information within yourself. And within them, there are more of Jim's recordings. There's also a lot of Jim's artwork. So if you're interested in any more still life stuff, you can find a bunch of links in the description below. Finally, I really hope that you're getting as much out of this as I have. This is why we started this whole thing in the first place, because the combination of Jim and the practice of stillness had really helped to transform our lives here at Still Life. We just wanted to make as much of that available to you. So hopefully you're getting a lot out of it, and please let us know if there's anything that you want to see more of in the future, or less of. Anyway, hope you have a lovely day. Bye-bye.